Today's blog is going to be about some settings, some camera settings on your SLR. So I'm going to talk about the magic triangle, which is the relationship between the ISO, the aperture and the shutter priority, and the different results that will give you. And I'm going to talk about shooting on aperture priority, because that is mostly what I work with in architectural photography. That tends to be what you need, and as the weeks go on you'll kind of understand why. I'm going to put some slides in today and talk about them. I hope that there'll be a useful reference point for you. I know they really helped me understand things when I started at college, because they were very simple and just explained what your camera does, really, what happens when you put it on the various settings. So hopefully they'll be useful, and enjoy today's blog, everybody. Take care, bye.
Okay, so our first slide today is just talking about ISO. I would imagine most of you probably know what this is already, but it's the equivalent of film speed in a traditional camera. So when we are struggling to be able to take a shot and we don't have a tripod, for example, we can always increase our ISO to give us that shot in focus. However, there are certain disadvantages to shooting on high ISOs. First of which is the fact that you don't get the quality of the image. So you get increased grain, which obviously reduces how much you can enlarge your photograph by. There are certain things you can do in post-production to help this, but very rarely you can overcome all the problems of shooting on high ISO, and as the slide says, the image will appear soft. So useful in some circumstances, but think carefully before you use it. Okay, so this is the magic triangle slide I spoke about earlier. I think it's pretty self-explanatory. You have these three major settings on your camera: your ISO, your shutter speed, and your aperture priority. So shutter speed is how long the shutter stays open for, and the aperture priority is how much light, how much you open up your camera lens. So altering any one of these three will really get you to the same position. So just think about this triangle, because it is kind of obvious when you actually sit down and think about what these three things do. Okay, so now we come on to my favourite slide of all time, I think. This for me was when the penny dropped, when I realised what the different controls did, particularly for me aperture priority, because so much of my work depends on getting this 100% accurate. So what you've got to remember is it's kind of the opposite to what you would logically think. So the smaller the F number, the greater the amount of light you let in. So F2, you are letting in a huge amount of light, and above it you will see the equivalent in seconds, i.e. your shutter priority. So you will, if you see the little square at the top, that explains it perfectly to me. So when you get to the higher f-stop numbers, you are letting in less light. But there are circumstances, especially in architecture, when you are photographing really large buildings. I'll put an example of one up in a minute, of a shot that I took of St. Paul's Cathedral. Now, you have to have the greatest f-stop you possibly can to get all of this in focus, which means probably something like f22. So what you're doing at that point is you are shutting down the amount of light you're letting in, which makes it quite challenging. So we will talk more about shooting at both ends of the spectrum, but take some time to think about this slide, because it really is the kind of the key to everything, I think. Once you get your head around this, you know exactly what you need to do in most circumstances. So yeah, I hope that's useful, everybody. Hi, so this is the photograph I was referring to earlier. This is a shot of the high altar of St Paul's Cathedral. So this would have been, you would have to take this on a tripod. There is no way you can hand hold for a photograph like this. I don't want to use high ISO because I need everything sharp, because there is so much detail you'll see in all the paintings and the candelabras and the decoration of the cathedral. So you're going to have to put this at something like f22, probably focusing 2/3 in maybe. But again, it depends on the subject matter that's in your shot. So this is kind of an unfair example because it's a pretty impossible photograph. This is 11 photographs blended together, and each time exposing for the various different light sources that I want to capture. So you've got a light source for the choir stalls, a light source for the stained glass, the candles, the chandeliers, the natural light. So yeah, a lot of post-production, probably best part of a day's work in post-production, putting this photograph together. So yeah, it's not something you can go in and snap, but hopefully once we get on to all the editing features that I'd like to share with you, it'll be a bit more straightforward, or become clearer to you why these are so important. But just for you to know, so this will be a really long exposure because I'm shutting down the size of the aperture to get everything in focus, which means as I said, I need it on a tripod, but it means you're going to have a huge exposure time. So the shutter's going to stay open for a very long time to capture the amount of light you need to create this image. Okay guys, talk to you soon.